Now, I've already apologized to the parents over and over again. I don't apologize to you. Don't apologize to you.
Attorney Norm Pattis called it strategic.
We thought it was vicious and uncalled for and gratuitous.
But at the same time, the plaintiff's attorneys called for a recess to determine how they'd orchestrate the rest of the day.
You think I could book that for like the weekend of the 14th when the soundtrack comes out? If so, bump somebody. All right, thanks. I love you, man. Bye. I got my MTV out. Savage! I'm a savage! Oh! I'm a savage! Whatever I want, I'm going to get! Whatever I want, I have to get!
And you're confident on these cases. You don't think you're going to be behind a defendant table throughout the entire campaign, crippled and unable to campaign?
You know, if I am, it's going to show what a fake deal it all is. It's all fake. It's all just fake stuff.
Do you want it televised?
In order to interfere with the election. This was election interference at the highest level.
One person responsible for this nightmare, and he's acknowledged and he brags about it, Donald Trump.
Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce traveled with the president. Good morning, Mary.
2020 rape conviction against former media mogul Harvey Weinstein was thrown out by New York's highest court today.
Now to another big headline. Arizona's governor plans to sign a bill today repealing a 160-year-old abortion ban.
Now, I've already apologized to the parents over and over again. I don't apologize to you. Don't apologize to you.
Attorney Norm Pattis called it strategic.
We thought it was vicious and uncalled for and gratuitous.
But at the same time, the plaintiff's attorneys called for a recess to determine how they'd orchestrate the rest of the day.
You think I could book that for like the weekend of the 14th when the soundtrack comes out? If so, bump somebody. All right, thanks. I love you, man. Bye. I got my MTV out. Savage! I'm a savage! Oh! I'm a savage! Whatever I want, I'm going to get! Whatever I want, I have to get!
And you're confident on these cases. You don't think you're going to be behind a defendant table throughout the entire campaign, crippled and unable to campaign?
You know, if I am, it's going to show what a fake deal it all is. It's all fake. It's all just fake stuff.
Do you want it televised?
In order to interfere with the election. This was election interference at the highest level.
One person responsible for this nightmare, and he's acknowledged and he brags about it, Donald Trump.
Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce traveled with the president. Good morning, Mary.
2020 rape conviction against former media mogul Harvey Weinstein was thrown out by New York's highest court today.
Now to another big headline. Arizona's governor plans to sign a bill today repealing a 160-year-old abortion ban.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's your host, Pastor Joshua, your union president, Joshua Capilla, here on the Patriot News Hour. I want to make this show today about Tim Walz, ladies and gentlemen. Who is Tim Walz? What is he about? Why did Kamala Harris pick him? How does it reflect upon her as running for the president, her character as an individual, as a woman, as a human being? Well, what does he support? Are you wondering? He supports abortion all the way up into the baby's born. He supports amnesty, sanctuary cities for illegal immigrants. He supports driver's license for illegal immigrants. He supports a social safety net like health care for illegal immigrants. When Americans are struggling exponentially to even cover their health care costs. I have a question. How are we ever going to get the health care cost and the system under control when the Democrats continuously want to fund health care for illegal immigrants and people that break the law? Well, this is an absolute travesty. This individual, Tim Walz, will be a disaster for the country, and he will strengthen the socialist agenda for Kamala Harris. Now, the good thing is Trump and Vance, if they point these things out consistently and do their job effectively, can majorly cripple the agenda in the running of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And they need to do it. I'm from Arizona. Like I said, I'm in a swing state. And I feel like if she would have picked Mark Kelly, it would have been a lot better for her than this individual. Even though I'm not an extreme fan of Mark Kelly, he would have been a better candidate, or the governor of Pennsylvania. So she's making some huge mistakes already. And I believe she's scared to debate Donald Trump. I've seen the video clips. I've seen her press conferences when she said she accepts the debate. Well, boy, she doesn't look good to me. She has met her match with Donald Trump. And the reason why she has met her match is because her record. Ladies and gentlemen, she is simply not qualified to bring this country out of, I would say, the recession that is here already, to stop these wars. I want you to think about something. What is going to happen with this Iranian-Israeli conflict, geopolitically, inflation-wise, commodities rise, impacting us here in our home in the United States of America? If you think gas and formula and groceries and diapers and oil and everything is expensive as it can be right now, including energy, just wait till the global crisis hits, ladies and gentlemen. What I really want to do is pan over to Fox News, and I want you to hear the video clip for yourself. What Tim Walz truly believes, ladies and gentlemen. I only have one question. Are you ready?
It's your party. Typically in the Democratic campaign, during the primaries, you run to the left, then you tack back toward the middle for the general election. A lot of people would say that she's tacked way left with this pick for the general election.
Look, I think
don't look at me so puzzled.
Happy Monday to you. Happy Tuesday to you too, John. Look, I think there's going to be a lot of folks on the right that sort of try to frame Tim Walz as progressive or frame him to the left. I think if you look at his record very carefully, what you'll actually find is somebody that's actually more populist. If you look at him and the issues that he cared about and the things that he passed with Republicans, I might add, in Minnesota, are very dissimilar to the things that you saw Ivanka take up at her time when she was senior advisor to the president. Paid family leave, early childhood care, maternity care, things that are populist and things that most Americans agree with. Beyond that, I think you're going to also see, like as you saw JD Vance do there, Republicans harken back to 2020 and what happened in Minneapolis following the death of George Floyd in the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that most Americans won't forget. And I think it's also worth pointing out that in his record, what you also find is if it wasn't for Tim Walz, Derek Chauvin would not be behind bars. Remember, the DA in Hincapin County was not going to prosecute this police officer, and it was Tim Walz who said, I'm going to swap you out, and actually named Keith Ellison, the attorney general there, in charge of this prosecution that got justice for George Floyd. So the more and more Republicans bring this argument up, the more and more, in a way, it will rally folks who are part of a Democratic base that just a couple weeks ago was asleep, who found this issue to be very palatable and were very excited that Derek Chauvin is behind bars for over 100 years.
Well, I think that there's no question that a lot of people are very happy that Derek Chauvin is behind bars. But he says, don't call him a progressive, call him populist. Let's hear how Tim Walz describes himself. Listen here.
Don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. Just do the damn work.
Is that populism or is that progressivism, socialism?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really speaks to how people in the Democrat Party think that this might be persuasive to a moderate voter, but Minnesota is not known for moderation in its Democrat Party, and Tim Walz really is not known for being anything other than a pretty hardline progressive leftist. And it is these things, like he supports sanctuary cities, open borders with immigration. He was, as you know, very supportive of the BLM riots that burned down his city and caused so much destruction to Minneapolis. He was out there very openly for that. He resisted bringing in the National Guard, even as people who own businesses were being shut down. He was a radical on COVID shutdowns, you know, even opening up bars and tattoo parlors before churches. And he supports abortion. He signed a bill supporting abortion up until the moment of birth. And so when you think about Joe Biden picking someone like Kamala Harris, that was Joe Biden thinking he needed to shore up his left-wing base. But Kamala already has that left-wing base. And so I think a lot of Republicans are celebrating and a lot of people are surprised because she leaned right back into that hard left base rather than trying to have someone who would maybe reach a more moderate vote.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar sure seem to believe that he represents the left. Here's what they put out on X this morning. AOC, Vice President Harris made an excellent decision, and Governor Walz is her running mate. Ilhan Omar, congratulations to our next Vice President, Tim Walz, bringing Minnesota nice to the ticket. If you've got the approval of the squad, you're as far left as it goes.
I mean, it's the job of the Democratic Party in this moment to unite behind a candidate if the goal is to beat Donald Trump. So that's not surprising to me that you're seeing members of the Democratic Party, folks who excite parts of the Democratic base, and say we support Tim Walz. I think with that being said, where I depart for what Molly's saying is I think most Americans can agree. One, I think this ideal to abortion to birth is false, right? Because there's no evidence that there are any OBGYNs that are out here saying after a baby leaves the birthing canal, then let's commit an abortion, because that's not an abortion. That's called murder, and nobody agrees with that. Number one. And number two, and more importantly, I think what he is saying, where a majority of Americans agree, is that a woman and her doctor should be able to make these decisions without the government intruding in them. And I think Tim Walz and Kamala Harris and the majority of Americans agree on that.
So, in fact, a majority of Americans do support some protections for unborn children, even if they disagree on where. The Minnesota law is so extreme. It allows it up until the moment of birth. But I think also, this just shows with Kamala Harris, she didn't make a really confident pick. She wanted someone who wouldn't upstage her and who wouldn't be any more moderate than her. And I think given the issues with her competency that a lot of voters are worried about, it shows it's a surprisingly weak pick at a moment when she could have used some
Well, it
strength.
sure seems like the Trump campaign is go, thank goodness it wasn't Shapiro, because that would have really put Pennsylvania in play. I'm not sure this pick does.
Look, I think we've heard this line of attack, too, on Kamala Harris, of whether or not the vice president is competent. And I think what the polls are saying, the fact that 3 weeks ago, Democrats were behind in the polls by 4 or 5 points, and now this race is tied, shows the American people disagree with this logic that she's not competent. They think she probably is very competent.
Yeah, I mean, when I say Pennsylvania could have been in play, it probably would have really helped the Democrats in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Minnesota hasn't gone Republican in forever. So
even Walter Mondale won Minnesota, for Pete's sake. He lost every other state in 1984. Great to see you, folks.
Good to see you, John.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Tim Walz. How liberal is he? Progressive is just a code word like they use for calling a baby a fetus. They don't want to accept the truth, so they say, we're progressive. We're not socialist. We're not fascist. We're not communist. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a realist and I'm an independent. But there are some things I agree with the Democrats on, believe it or not. The problem is they go so far left, they become automatically destructive. People might say, well, what do you believe in accordance to some of the Democrat philosophy? Well, I believe that we should have a social safety net. Before Social Security, people were just lying out, dying, for crying out loud, traversing the streets. Our elderly population, we're homeless. We need Social Security. We need the commons like the police department and the fire department. Before it was the commons and before it wasn't government, I mean, they would let your house burn down if you didn't pay your bill, ladies and gentlemen. So there are things that I agree with that I think both parties actually agree with. But when we look at Tim Walz and his agenda, let alone standalone his abortion agenda, what an absolute disaster. I'm a Christian. I believe in the sanctity of human life. I believe in the forgiveness of all sins if a person repents. That's including abortion. But you can have one woman, one individual here, and she has an abortion, right? Feels terrible about it, carried us around for many years, gets counseling, repents, and is forgiven. But on the Democrat side, the left, these individuals rally for abortion, want abortion, just have mass demonstrations for abortions. They want taxpayer dollars allocated to abort babies. Then they'll say things like, well, Planned Parenthood is care. They have much more care than just for abortions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, you don't join something and promote something and defend something because they do one or two things right and they're massively evil. Planned Parenthood is a disastrous, evil organization. And I will even show you a soundbite on how they talk on Planned Parenthood when they were investigated. I want you to hear Donald Trump, ladies and gentlemen, and what he has to say about Tim Walz. And the fact of the matter is, if I can be honest, is abortion is a hot topic in this country. And do I truly believe as a minister that it'll be abolished one day forever? Yes and no. Before Christ returns, no. People are people. People want to do what they want. People are their own gods. People want one-night stands. People want to abort babies. It's a form of convenience. It will be eradicated when Christ returns, and his holiness makes everything perfect in the consummation of the kingdom. That will inevitably and eventually happen. But what did Christ say? Render to Caesar's what is Caesar's, and God's to God's. We're basically traversing in this home as Christians. So, ladies and gentlemen, no, Tim Walz is not qualified. No, Kamala Harris is not qualified. These two are the two of infamy. These two complement each other to the dire aspect of the destruction of the country. I mean, it's amazing that she picked an individual. Well, it's not amazing, I should say, but it's just astounding that she picks an individual that's going to make this country twice the child of hell, so to speak. It's a bad thing. It's bad news. It's bad policy all the way around. And as an independent, I got my disagreements with Trump also. Everybody knows that. But as you can see, I got the Trump banner in the back and the American flag, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because we got to take America back again. The Democrats have gone too far. So far, they're not the party of JFK. They're just not. They're unreasonable, irrational. And to me, they're becoming irrelevant in the sense of true Christianity, using the Bible any way they want to use it and abuse it for their own agenda and manipulate it. And they take bits and pieces and choose what they want to do with it, which is just a travesty in itself, ladies and gentlemen. But I want you to hear Donald Trump and what he has to say about abortion, what he has to say about Tim Walz, and we'll be right back. I only have one question. Are you ready?
So I think the abortion issue has been very much tempered down, and I've answered, I think, very well in the debate, and it seems to be much less of an issue, especially for those where they have the exceptions, as you know. And I think it's, when I look, for 52 years, they wanted to bring abortion back to the states. They wanted to get rid of Roe v. Wade, and that's Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and everybody, liberals, conservatives, everybody wanted it back in the states, and I did that. Now the states are voting, and frankly, some of the votes are much more, if you could say, liberal than you would think. Ohio turned out to be, they had a big vote, and it turned out to be a much more liberal standing than people would have thought. Kansas, the same thing, and then you have Texas, and you have other places where it may be different. But the issue has been brought back to the states now, and like Ronald Reagan, I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. I believe strongly. I think that that's a very important thing. I think when you have to follow your heart. But when you don't believe in the exceptions, I think it's much tougher. It's a much tougher issue. But about 82% of Republicans do believe in exceptions. I think and a lot of them are changing their mind and coming even further. I think that abortion has become much less of an issue. It's I think it's actually going to be a very small issue. What I've done is I've done what every Democrat and every Republican wanted to have done, and we brought that issue back to the states. And now the states are voting on it. And frankly, some of the votes are a lot different than people would have thought. But it's the vote of the people is taking care of it. And, when you think about the Democrats are really the radical ones in this, because they're allowed to do abortion on the 8th and 9th month and even after birth. If you look at your new governor from Minnesota, he's like the governor previous, the former governor. I don't want to get him mixed up because Glenn is doing a good job and he's leading our whole campaign in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. But previous to Glenn, the governor, he said the baby will be born. We will put the baby aside and we will decide with the mother what we're going to do. In other words, whether or not we're going to kill the baby. The Minnesota gentleman, this guy agrees with that. He is the most liberal. Look, between her and him, there's never been anything like this. There's never been a combination. So I'll use the word progressive. You know, they want to go progressive. They don't like the word liberal. I like liberal better. I think it's more appropriate because nobody knows what progressive means. But they now like to use the word progressive. But there's certainly never been anybody so liberal like these two, or even close. I think the abortion issue has been taken down many notches. I don't think it's a big factor anymore, really. And when people hear what I said in the debate, and I think I said it very well during the debate, we brought it back to the states. Everybody wanted it in the states. And very importantly, and you think about this, assuming you have exceptions. If you don't have exceptions, it's a more difficult thing. At the same time, there are people that strongly feel that way, and you have to follow your heart, and you should follow.
Look, ladies and gentlemen, this is just out of control with the Democrat Party. I'm going to tell you right now what's going on is Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz because he was the first governor to jump on the abortion bandwagon when it was actually ruled unconstitutional and given back to the states. He was the first one jumping on the bandwagon to try to defend the destruction of human life. And we have to remember one thing. The Democrat Party, their idol, is the altar of aborting human life. And that is absolutely 100% true. And they call it reproductive freedom. Just hearing that makes me want to jump out the window. Ladies and gentlemen, abortion simply drives me crazy, drives me insane. Worshipping to the altar of Molech. And it's like watching ancient biblical times where God is condemning the Israelites and foreign nations and anybody who practiced such an abomination. And just to watch Kamala Harris and Tim Walz so ecstatic and happy about taking human life, it tells me how far Americans in America have descended into complete madness. It's a travesty what has happened. And that is why she picked Tim Walz, because he is the first one who went straight for the unborn, the first one who went straight for the attack on the unborn. And she's so happy about it, calling the destruction of life Planned Parenting and reproductive freedom. It's just madness. And I've always asked myself this question. How is it a woman can have 4 or 5 abortions and then have 2 or 3 children and then be at the dinner table and then sit there and think to myself, how can they sit there and say, well, I should have had 3 more kids sitting here, but I don't. And I understand this, so I have to be sensitive on this subject, that there's a lot of men who force abortion on women. And it's absolutely 100% terrible. It's horrendous. And I'm not talking about rape or incest. I'm talking about convenience. And a lot of individuals have sex, create the baby, but don't want the responsibility. Well, don't have sex. Use protection. Figure something out. Don't destroy a human life, because that baby is a human life. And you know how many women regret and suffer from lifelong trauma after they abort a baby? But the Democratic narrative is to convince the masses to do such a thing. Population control, the deep state, to limit the resources, to import workers. It's all a cynical, destructive plan to bring the United States of America down to its knees. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to hear these statements from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz theirself. I just have one question. Are you ready?
We are witnessing a full-on attack against hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights. Take reproductive freedom. Now think about this. Donald Trump said he wants to punish women. And as as a result of his actions, today in America, 1 out of 3 women live in a state with a Trump abortion ban. 1 out of 3. Some of these bans go back to the 1800s, even before women had a right to vote. Think about that. Well, Tim and I have a message for Trump and others who want to turn back the clock on our fundamental freedoms. We're not going back. And so let me say about Tim Walz, he has shown up to stand against these attacks long before he stood on the stage with me. After Roe was overturned, he was the first governor in the country to sign a new law that enshrined reproductive freedom as a fundamental right. And with Tim Walz by my side when I am President of the United States and we win majorities in the United States Congress, we will pass a bill to restore reproductive freedom, and I will proudly sign it into law.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next segment before we end our show about Tim Walz is his stolen valor. Abandoning his military service, so to speak. Well, he said he retired. He said he was done with his active duty. He was a master sergeant. But this guy left his combat unit behind, no extension, did not go and serve with them because he didn't want to go to combat and wants to take the firearms that we own away from us and let the criminals that he's going to import for sanctuary cities and illegal immigration own the handguns. Ladies and gentlemen, do you really trust an individual that did not serve his country fully? JD Vance did. And JD Vance criticizes Tim Walz for it. So we got a guy that's a socialist. We got a guy that's an abortionist, even after the baby's born. We got a guy that wants sanctuary cities. We have an individual that retires instead of going and serving overseas with his combat unit. We got JD Vance that did the complete opposite and served honorably in his country. But hey, Tim Walz, he wants to tell us we shouldn't own firearms. He wants to take our guns. He wants to enhance abortions. He wants to break the bank in the United States of America by funding all of these programs by individuals that got here and broke the law. Well, how did that work out for the governor of New York, Eric Adams? Didn't work out very well, did it? Come one, come all, bring your huddled masses. We have the Statue of Liberty here. And then he's the one running around with his hair on fire, crying it's unsustainable. The hypocrisy has reached a boiling point, ladies and gentlemen. Tim Walz, Kamala Harris will be an absolute disaster for our country, for the unborn, for the deficit, for our military, for foreign policy in general. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the truth. And for your pocketbook. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take you to a video clip, and I want you to hear a combat individual that served in the armed services, and I want you to hear Vance and what he is saying about Tim Walz. Just got one question. Are you ready?
When Tim Walz was asked by his country to go to Iraq, you know what he did? He dropped out of the Army and allowed his unit to go without him, a fact that he's been criticized for aggressively by a lot of the people that he served with. He said we shouldn't allow weapons that I used in war to be on America's streets. Well, I wonder, Tim Walz, when were you ever in war? What was this weapon that you carried into war, given that you abandoned your unit right before they went to Iraq, and he has not spent a day in a combat zone? What bothers me about Tim Walz is the stolen valor garbage.
All right, Florida Congressman Corey Mills joins us. He has a military background. May I just lay out a timeline here? Walz left the National Guard in May 2005, 24 years of service. His unit was not given deployment orders to Iraq until July of that year. Walz had put in his retirement papers 5 to 7 months before he retired as a master sergeant. Congressman, you're a military guy. Was this fair criticism of Walz from Vance?
Well, it's not just a fact that, I was a military veteran. I'm a military combat veteran who had deployed to Iraq and served honorably with my unit. Look, I was not actually supposed to go to Iraq with my unit. I actually was at the end of my terminal service date and within a threshold that would have actually seen me transfer out. I went to my brigade commander and requested a 6-month extension so that I could deploy with my unit because I didn't want to leave them behind and then get stop-lossed as the war began. So I went to Iraq even though I had an out. But I knew that it was important not to have an abandonment of the men that I had trained with and that I was sworn to protect and fight alongside. That's very different in contrast to Walz, who left because he wanted to be a politician rather than looking out for trying to serve with his unit. The other thing that JD has talked about is the fact that people wanted to criticize Senator Vance. He actually deployed to Iraq. He actually served abroad in the United States Marine Corps honorably. And Tim Walz, who knew that he had never attended the Sergeant Major's Academy, continued to say that he was a Command Sergeant Major, even though he knew his military record reflected as a Master Sergeant. So there's a lot of embellishments, but the pattern of abandonment actually is fitting for the Democrat Party. Think about the fact that I had to go to Afghanistan to conduct the first successful rescue of Americans after Biden left them there. 255 Americans that I had to get out of Israel when Biden abandoned them there. And the 23 Americans I rescued in Haiti when Biden-Harris abandoned them there. So a pattern of abandonment seems to be a Democrat trait.
Okay, let's get it all out in the open. Next one. A Pakistani man with ties to Iran arrested, accused of planning assassinations of American politicians, including Donald Trump. Have we got terror cells in America already? And if so, what are we going to do about it?
Well, absolutely, we have terror cells within America. We've had an open border for almost 4 years that's had hundreds of people on the terrorist watch list come across and tens of millions of others, not to mention the fact that the border czar, as approved by the Biden resolution, Kamala Harris was the border czar responsible for this very thing. And so to think that after having 48 plus countries who's come across, knowing that they're Iranian, they're Russian, the cartels who've come across, the members that are part of gangs who know that President Trump will shut the border and impact their revenue stream, where Biden has been the employee of the month at $13+ billion in revenue. Of course, there are terror cells here in the United States as a result of failed administrations and the inability under Mayorkas to be able to secure our borders.
But we can't do anything about it, can we? Because we don't know where they are. We don't know who they are or where they are.
Because we have catch and release in this country, Varney, and people who are unable and unwilling to enforce the laws that are on the books, which is a violation of the Take Care Clause in the Constitution.
Corey Mills, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Come back soon. Thank you, Corey. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Stu.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the show today. I appreciate you tuning in to the Patriot News Hour. Support the show if you can. Subscriptions are coming soon with a lot of extra content. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Stand firm, stand tall, support your country, support Donald Trump, and let's take America back again. This is the Patriot News Hour. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
Get on down.